In Man Facing Southeast, an unexpected new patient at a mental hospital claims to be an alien from outer space. His presence challenges the characters around him in a science fiction film that leans more into philosophical drama than it does E.T. phoning home. Let's take a look. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
And for some reason David was facing in like the corner direction before we started.
Yeah.
I don't know what he was doing, but he was just staring out the window.
I was transmitting and receiving to a fly that I was trying to kill.
Yes. Trying to access your OnlyFans account remotely.
Of course.
Welcome everyone. This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together, we talk about a sci-fi movie, and today's movie is a Patreon vote winner. Every month, our $10 tiers and up patrons get to vote between 3 movies. And this was another 80s theme vote. This was like 3 like possible hidden gems, like movies that have, got a bit of buzz on the sort of the film fan sections of the internet, but aren't super well known. And this is Man Facing Southeast from 1986. It's an Argentinian film. And, well, it does have some broad similarities with a movie that came out about 20 years later called K-PAX, which we'll talk about a little bit. We've not done K-PAX on the show yet, so that'll come someday down the line. But it's about a man in a mental hospital who claims he's an alien. And the story largely revolves around the doctor who's trying to treat him and how he becomes obsessed with trying to treat him and whether or not he believes, disbelieves, so on and so on. So we'll get into a lot of that. It's a very philosophical movie, which is maybe a big difference, I would say, between this and K-PAX. I think K-PAX is more of a straight story about the idea of what if this happened, whereas this movie's more about, doesn't this make you think of Christ? Let's talk about the duality of man and such things. So
why is humanity such dicks to each other all the time?
We really are the worst. Yeah. So that is the movie we're talking about. We'll start spoilers for you, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we go into the spoilers. And just before we get started, I'll just remind you, if you are enjoying the show on YouTube, please do hit the like button. It helps us out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can get bonus stuff from us. There's a bonus show, a couple of bonus shows, in fact, that me and David do on Patreon. We'll tell you more about them at the end, but I do know that there's bonus stuff to get if you want to support everything. So, I mean, I got the basic premise pretty much there. One day, an extra patient's there who was never admitted to the hospital, and that just kind of kicks off her story and takes us down that. I had never seen this before. I assume you hadn't either.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
That being said, based off of the poster on IMDb and the name as well, I was kind of expecting this just be like a full-on art house movie, or at least something in the weirder realm, closer to like Cronenberg sort of stuff. But then actually like sitting down and watching it, it is a pretty like standard, straightforward, just like you said, a philosophical talk kind of movie. Not so much a weird like get your emotions wrapped around this one sort of thing.
It's got a bit of an art house thing going for it, but it's kind of in between the extreme end of art house and the more straightforward. It's somewhere in the middle, I would say. But we'll get into it. So as well, I'll just start with a simple question. David, what did you think of Man Facing Southeast?
I thought it was good. It was really hard to attach this one, primarily just because the entire time I was waiting for it to do something more with the premise. I was waiting for it to like really explore this idea, kind of in the same way with K-PAX, which I will try not to reference again, but it kept on playing with this idea of like, okay, another man showed up, but plot-wise, it didn't really ever do anything with it the entire time. It just kind of played with it in that sort of philosophical sense of, oh, well, this guy shows up and he says he's from another world and he's judging mankind and also wants to help us. Like, I like that in concept, but it just felt like the idea was so grand that they were presenting to us that it left so much that it could have done over the course of it. Add on top of it that I don't think I'm spoiling anything too much, is that there are points in this movie where we do get the definitive answer as to whether or not he is like special in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of ruins the philosophical aspect. Is like if we get the answer to it of specifically whether or not he is special, then we're the entire rest of it of playing with that idea kind of just goes moot at that point. But overall, I think it's a well-made movie. I think it had some cool ideas, but I just think it could have gone further with it.
Yeah, I also liked it. I think I could have loved it. Maybe it had a. I don't know. There's definitely something missing for me overall from it, and I don't know if that's just because, yes, I have seen another similar version of this story in a way.
Mm.
Although I do want to like just we won't bring up K-PAX again after this because I feel like it would just hamper the discussion of what we're actually
Right.
going to talk about. But I will say that beyond the broad idea that there is a patient in a hospital claiming to be an alien, and maybe a couple little minor things, they are
Mm.
very different stories. And the way they
Yes.
tackle what they're talking about, the way they handle it, very, very different. So this movie is a lot more like characters like whenever they're like the character Rantis, who's the patient, right, who claims he's an
Mm.
alien. Whenever he's talking to the doctor and they're going backwards and forwards, sometimes their conversations in this just straight up feel like someone is sitting down and doing like some philosophy, like 101, and going backwards and forwards about. So why are you here? Why are you doing this? What? Well, you don't have feelings. You say so. Why is that? How are you observing everyone else around you? There's a lot of like answers to a lot of these questions, and the way that he reacts to those questions. There's a
Mm.
lot more kind of like a contemplation style of movie, as opposed to we're here to build up to a crescendo of a big ending that's going to feel like it ties everything together in a neat bow. It really does not have that type of culmination at all. It ends in a very kind of intentionally open way where it's
Yeah.
more about okay, think about everything you've just seen as opposed to feeling like you've got a complete story in a more kind of traditional sense. So uh, and I respect that. I don't want it to be more normal. The last thing, because what
Oh
makes it
yeah.
feel unique is the fact that it does feel different and it is doing its own thing. But it does feel like there maybe could have been like some more stuff we could have done with some of the ideas, where it almost felt like at the end to me that it was like they had a time limit and it's like, oh shit, we're hitting the over 45 mark. We have to wrap it up, so let's just quickly end it. As
Yeah.
opposed to it felt like, oh, we're neatly culminated here and it's time to end the story. I don't know. So
Oh yeah. The last like 10, 15 minutes of this definitely felt like they were speed running through it. It felt like this is where things that probably should have been seeded throughout the first half to two-thirds of the movie all kind of just happened very quickly right here. And then we just all of a sudden hit the end and it doesn't feel like you said, it feels like there's a time limit. Like there should have been an extra 2, 3 scenes minimum after this.
yeah. So yeah, I think the other big thing as well is that the main character he's very well explored. The movie takes its time to give you a clear sense of who this guy is. And by the main character, I don't mean the patient, I mean the doctor. He is the main
Mm.
character of the story. He's the one who we get a lot of details about his past. This idea that he's jaded, that he's divorced, that he's kind of lost faith in his profession and like his will to live. And it's kind of interesting where they take his character by the end, I felt, because it wasn't the more neat character arc that I thought it was going to be or could have been. Instead, they
Mm.
play it more as kind of a sad story. And again, we'll get into that
Yeah.
as we go through it in spoilers. But
It feels a lot more. I mean, as much as this movie is not realistic in a lot of ways, his character arc definitely felt the most based in reality. In
mhm,
that it feels like yeah, it's hard to change who you are as a person. It's hard to like really make that evolutionary leap into a different way of thinking. But it does feel like we get to see those first steps. We get to see him slowly changing as he like believes more and more this idea that Rantes is this visitor, or even if you take the path of he doesn't believe it, because the movie does play with whether or not he's actually believing any of this stuff. He still at least sees the joy and the things that Rantes brings to the people around him, and that changes him for the better. But obviously not in a way that's like by the end he's pulling an Ebenezer Scrooge, just giving out money to people down the street or whatever. He's still just a normal guy.
yeah. So Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it does have its own visual style. It has music's a big theme in the movie, actually, so it kind of uses its
Yes.
music. Although sometimes I would argue that the saxophone in the sound mix was a bit too loud, and it didn't matter because it's a foreign film to me and I'm reading subtitles anyway. But I'm like, if I was listening to what they were saying to hear it, I'd be struggling right now with this saxophone blaring over the top of them.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. But this soundtrack and also the way that the doctor is giving a rolling voiceover the entire time, basically
Yes.
stating his thoughts on what he's doing. This is very film noir. Even if it's not particularly following like the shot structure, the basic things like that, it's very much this idea of a man is confronted with a mystery that he has to solve, and all the mood and the atmosphere that goes into it just really strikes that film noir itch.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the performances here are important to the movie. It kind of hinders on two people effectively to tell its story. And one of them, Rante's the patient who says he's an alien. He is intentionally very like unexpressive, right? He
Mm.
kind of is very just blank faced a lot of the time, which obviously takes skill to do, but it does also mean that it, it's almost up to the doctor, right? The actor playing the doctor almost has to do double duty in a weird way because he
Yeah.
has to be the one who's reacting to everything in the scene.
Hmm.
Whereas Rante's character effectively gets to just be the same all the time. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some subtle moments eventually, and those obviously are handled well, I think, by the actor. But so much of it is like, okay, you're just acting like you're borderline catatonic, and then the other guy has to do all of the acting around you. You're almost a prop in the scene, whilst the other one is doing all the actual performing.
Yeah. I do wonder how much we are losing with the foreign language, like whether or not
Mm,
there are some subtle inflections or like wordplay or something like that that would give him just a bit more depth emotionally. But obviously, that's something that we can't really avoid there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know, but still, definitely, I think the acting and directing solid. I think
Mhm.
the script, which is also by the director, Eliseo Subiela, if I'm saying
Looks right
that
to me.
correctly.
Yep.
He wrote and directed the movie. I happened to looking him up just before we started. He passed away in 2016.
Okay.
But he apparently after this movie, which it didn't get a lot of like widespread, uh, you know, like releases and things like that outside of its own country. It got him noticed by Hollywood, and there was offers for him to go and make movies in America, and he declined and said, "No, I'd rather just stay in Argentina and make movies." So he
Hmm.
kind of just kept doing that, seemingly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is interesting. But yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about before we get into spoilers, because I feel like so much of what happens is kind of touching on the spoilers.
I mean, yeah, it is hard to really go into it. The only thing that I do want to say is that it was explicitly said that this or sorry, the book that K-PAX was based off of, because I know this is the last time I'll bring it up, but K-PAX was based off of
A
a
book,
series,
yes.
well, a series of books, and the director slash writer actually sued for similarities, plagiarism, and whatnot, but because he didn't have the funds and it was international stuff, he basically just had to drop it. So we never got any actual follow up to that, but he at least was aware of the similarities himself and thought it enough to bring a lawsuit. So
Yeah,
that's there at the very least.
the writer of K-PAX is adamant that was never aware of this movie.
Mm.
And to be honest, I don't know. I genuinely have a hard time believing which what is true or not. Because honestly, outside of the broad concept, I don't know if there's that enough similarities to think that even if he was inspired by this, which I don't think that would be a big deal though. Like, okay, so the
No,
broad concept, man in a mental hospital thinks he's an alien. Like, as long as you're doing your own thing with that, I don't think you can say that's plagiarism. I don't know.
no.
That's
Yeah, it's would have to basically show intent is the biggest thing, or that he did know it beforehand, which yeah, I don't think that it is. I think that the core concept is definitely similar enough for something, but as soon as we get out of the concept, it just plays it so differently that it is kind of hard to see those as the same idea, really.
it's just wild to me because like if someone makes a movie about terrorists invading a building, like are the
Mhm.
makers of Die Hard suing? I don't think they are. It's just
Nah,
it's just another Die Hard style movie. It's fine. Like you just kind of roll
yeah.
with it.
And plus, I mean, if we're really going in on it, I'm going to say Man Facing Southeast is definitely getting sued by the writers of the Bible, because dear Lord.
Oh dear. Yeah, it's a weird thing to me, but I don't think there's enough here to say that there's something
Hmm.
worth suing over. Like even if the writer of K-PAX is lying and he was inspired by this, I don't think there's anything wrong with the level of inspiration that's actually going on
Yeah,
between them.
no, it definitely doesn't. Like, maybe it would require like a and special thanks to sort of thing, but
Yeah.
nothing that would be like a full retraction and all funds going to the original guy. That doesn't seem like there's enough there for that to be justified.
Oh yeah, there's a credit in the Terminator. I don't know if you ever noticed
Hmm.
this, but there's a credit in the Terminator. It doesn't even say thanks to or based on or anything like that. It just says, uh, we acknowledge the works of, I think it's Harlan Ellison, because Harlan
Okay.
Ellison had done some stories or whatever about like a future robot uprising or something.
Hmm.
And Cameron always claimed that he didn't base it on anything. Like he always, like the story he always told is that he had this dream of like this robot rising from fire, which is literally the moment towards the end of that movie after the tanker truck blows up, and that was just
Right.
kind of his genesis of that idea. But yeah, there apparently was a bit of a dispute, and the result of that dispute was that credit in the movie saying we acknowledge these other works exist, and we're leaving it at that. Like
Yeah,
it's fine. So
that's fair.
yeah. But anyway, so all right, so spoilers then for Man Facing Southeast.
Mhm.
Well, we'll dive into it and get. So yeah, I think what's interesting at the start of this movie is that he just appears at the hospital. He's not admitted. He's not. It's not like no one someone finds him because he's acting strange and they end up sending him here because they don't know where to put him. He just shows up.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting, because I don't think we're going to go through this in order like we normally do with some
No.
movies. I feel like this one's going to be a lot more jumping around based on just whatever we're talking about,
Mhm.
because it's not got like a really easy to remember like curve to a plot. It's more just sort of general ideas going
Yeah,
throughout.
it's the first hour and a half and then the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, because one of the things that was surprising to me is that Rantis just leaves sometimes whenever he wants to, and no one
Mhm.
stops him. Not
Yeah,
because they let him go, but because well, I mean, we see that he's got telekinetic abilities at least.
right. And I
So
do want to talk about that, but yeah, I do. Him being able to leave, I mean, that makes sense with the point in the movie is that they basically say, like, yeah, he showed up, so he's not under court order to have to stay here or anything like that. So he's free to leave in that way. But also, he, after talking to doctors and whatnot, he's completely fine. He's harmless. All the doctors realize that he's not going to hurt anybody, so they just let him go. The only thing he's got is this, as they say, delusion that he comes from a different planet.
and let's talk about that delusion because it's very
Mhm.
specific. There's a lot, obviously, he gives a
Yes.
lot of details about this. He's not like he looks like a human because he's not physically here, or not in
Yes.
the traditional sense. He he is a projection made up of light
Hmm.
to look like a human being, but
Hmm.
it's being projected from whoever far away.
Whatever planet he's from.
Yeah. Uh, so okay, that's one thing. And there's a lot of honestly one of the weirdest things about like him discussing where he's from and what he is. I felt like there was times where I was getting a little mixed up in terms of what he was actually saying he was and what the doctor was interpreting. Because
Right.
at one point the doctor says, "Oh, so you don't have parents, so you're like a robot then." And I never took that as like accurate. I just took that as him trying to interpret and getting it wrong. But later on, Rantis at one point does say that he's like computer brain or something is like can't process something, and I went,
Hmm.
oh wait, so there is some sort of computer element to your existence as
Yeah.
well.
Honest to God, I thought I had it figured out, like after the first explanation, and then there was a little bit afterwards where they said, I think he said like, oh, some of my kind, they get so wrapped up in this and they step out of the beam of the laser or something. And because they were talking about hard light and whatnot,
Yes.
the way I understood it earlier on is that his home planet, they are doing a thing where it's like a laser beam that is being controlled like mentally or it's like through this other alien, but then it's getting a actual human person thing here on Earth, like a hard light construct sort of thing. And then they're controlling that. with the added benefit of it has full biology and is actually like totally human.
Yes, the only thing they don't have is the ability to feel.
Right. But then, like you're saying, as the movie progresses, they add in these little extra things to it as to like, oh, well, at one point he does start ending up being forced on meds and he's unable to communicate back home. And that then kind of tears apart that level to me of, okay, so he's actually here, and it's not just like a connection to back home. I'm not sure what the physical body I'm looking at on screen actually is in this movie.
Well, I think the light has created a real body effectively, and I think his consciousness is in it. Like, I think his...
Okay.
Because one of the things to set up later is that there's others have came to Earth as well, and there's a select few who have become quote-unquote traitors because they've decided to step out of the light and now just... And they can actually feel now, and that's something we learn by the end because we meet another character who can feel. But
Right.
But that's something that they're not supposed to be able to do. They're not supposed to be feeling. They're supposed to be staying detached from everything else. It's almost, and this is something that comes up in science fiction a lot, is the idea of someone who comes to Earth, and it's not always an alien. In fact, Wings of Desire, it's an angel who does this, but it's the idea that you start to feel all of the sensations that a human being can feel, whether that be love, whether that can be good food, whether that could, whatever. And you're like, oh no, I want to stay here. This is great. I never want to leave. I want all these nice things. So, and that seems to be what some people from his home planet have done, is they've decided to stay.
I would love to meet the ones, because obviously this is all just based in a specific time, but I would love to meet the ones that are just like, no, you don't understand. I just started watching The Wire, and I can't be doing this. I have to stick around. I gotta watch that through.
I have to finish. Yeah, I have to.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think that was one of the surprising things to me, is that when he's like, oh yeah, there's others like me, like around the world right now, probably having the same conversation with their doctors, and we're all in hospitals like this because we don't have to worry about anyone believing anything we say here. You're just going to write it off as silly. But he gives them phone numbers. He's like, hey, this is the number of a doctor in Madrid. This is the doctor in, somewhere in Florida, whatever. Like, he gives them like phone numbers, says phone them and find out. And we see a quick scene where he's trying to phone, but the operator's like sort of like taking a long time to like put him through to the international.
Yeah. He calls him out and basically says, like, I'm giving you these numbers, and if you did collaborate with any of them, they would be the discovery of a century. But I know deep down that all of our people know that humans have such like a deep like shame reflex that none of you are actually going to say anything lest you be called crazy. Like, you're not actually going to call up someone saying, like, do you have an alien? Like, no one's going to do that.
Yeah. And the irony is, though, is that these other doctors are probably having the same feelings that he has, and it would be instantly okay, but because he's worried that the others don't, and these are just random doctors' phone numbers that somehow Rantis has found. Yeah.
And he'd have to give his name and be like, hi, I'm a doctor here. I have an alien. Who says that you have an alien?
Yes, I am Dr. John Smith from somewhere...
From medical hospital in US of A.
Yeah, because we're in Buenos Aires in the movie. That's where we're set. So the reason why it's called Man Facing Southeast is because one of the consistent things that he does is that he goes out and stands in the courtyard of the hospital and always faces southeast, as the title would imply. And he claims that he's doing that much like a satellite dish has to point in the right way towards the satellite. He's pointing in the right direction to wherever he's transmitting to and receiving information from, which is... Okay, fine, sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's a sort of visual that's kind of a little creepy, but also kind of like tranquil at the same time. It's got an interesting kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, it's the perfect blend of something that is not menacing, but definitely otherworldly.
Oh, I read when I was reading about the director on Wikipedia. Interesting little tidbit is that this idea of him staring in one direction like every day was inspired by something he saw. I don't know if he was a kid or if he was just maybe later in life, but there was like a guy in his neighborhood who would stare in a direction like every day for like some time on end with no seemingly explanation as to why. But he actually had since discovered years later that he was actually just staring in the direction of a woman who was in like a different house. So
he's a peeping Tom.
He's a peeping Tom. That's all he was. But I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, I would love to see that cutaway in this movie. He's just staring up at a window nearby, and there's just like the female ward of this insane asylum, just like, oh hey.
I feel like you could do like a sort of like a series of joke versions where you cut to different silly things that he could be staring at the whole time.
Yeah,
like he's just enamored with I don't know, someone just pouring ice cream into a cone slowly, like in an ice cream truck, and he's just staring at it all day.
It's the window from the beginning of the Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where it's just the shadow of him moving across.
Oh dear. So that's interesting, and then obviously it kind of shakes up a little bit with the fact that we do see him use powers, right? So even if he's wrong about being an alien, he does have telekinetic powers.
Right. And I feel like for me, that immediately sends the movie down a very specific path of, okay, this guy to the audience, because he never uses the powers in front of the doctor.
No.
To the audience, he is definitively an alien. Like, as long as nothing else in the movie establishes like the existence of psychics or angels or whatever else, he is definitively an alien. So from our perspective, this is no longer a concept of, do we believe him? Do we think he is an alien or not? We're all in on his corner, and we kind of just want to see him succeed at that point.
Yeah, we want to see him succeed, and I think part of you really wants to see the doctor's face when he finally sees something that he can't explain, and it never happens. It's kind of frustrating. And even towards the end of the movie, there's a moment with the other character who we've not gotten to yet, where she actually does something that proves something, at least, I mean, it doesn't necessarily prove they're aliens, but it proves that there's more to her than normal.
Right.
And it ties back into something that Rantis had said earlier on, because when we first meet this other character of Beatrice, this woman who comes to visit him, and that's like halfway through the movie, and it's like really the doctor's like, wait, what? He's got a visitor? He's a John Doe. How does he have a visitor?
He's been here for months. What the hell's going on?
And this woman's here to see him, and obviously the doctor wants to speak to her, and he tries to ask questions about him and whatnot. And when he talks to Rantis about her, Rantis says that she's a kind soul and she's very nice to people and things to that nature. But one of the things that he says is not only does she get really emotional and she shows it with like fluids, right? And obviously I'm thinking he means tears.
Right.
Right? But he specifically says a blue fluid comes from her mouth. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Because at this point, I don't think she's an alien. I'm just thinking, this is meant to be a human being you've bonded with. Yeah. And I'm like, what does he mean? What's he misinterpreted as blue fluid? I don't understand.
She got really upset while having a Slurpee, and he just didn't understand.
But it seems like, given the fact that everything else that you said in the movie, and then what we see later when we see this blue fluid come out of her mouth as she's having sex, right?
Yes.
I interpreted this as, okay, so she's one of these quote-unquote traitors who was from his planet and has stepped out and is sort of infiltrated and just become a human being, right? But one of the byproducts of that is that when she feels true happiness, right? She doesn't lose her soul like Angel in the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She instead oozes blue fluid from her mouth, right? Fine. Right? I was like, that was interesting. Like, I'm fine with all of that. Yeah. What frustrates me about it is that the doctor somehow misses this, even though he's having sex with her. How does he not see the blue fluid, which corroborates something that Rantis said earlier on, which sounded nonsensical at the time?
Yeah.
But now there's blue fluid coming from her mouth.
It doesn't matter, had sex.
He somehow just misses it. And I actually really like the way it's directed as well. The shot of like the blue fluid coming out of her mouth, it feels, it's a little bit erotic, but it's also kind of like otherworldly, and it feels like it's confirming something, and we're learning something in the moment. And then she chooses lying there with him to say, hey, I've lied to you about a couple of things. I'm from the same place that he is. I chose to be here. I chose to stay here. And the doctor obviously gets mad and throws her out, and it's a whole big scene. But like, yeah.
Well, in talking about it a little bit here, I very quickly just came to this conclusion of the reason that he doesn't notice it, which obviously is frustrating for the audience, but when you really view it through how the movie presents it is Christ allegory, I think this really comes down to the idea of faith, obviously. This is the idea of, you know, he doesn't see these things which would prove one way or the other, but he has to have faith that it is actually happening, because that's what religion's all about. That's what belief is all about, is that regardless of proof, you still believe it's happening and you put your faith in that.
If that's what the movie wants to do, though, I'm going to argue that we shouldn't see any proof either. We should be in the same boat as him.
And that's why as the moment he first uses telekinesis, I'm like, okay, but that's changing things. We're no longer using the Doctor as an audience avatar. We're instead just behind Rantis and just using him as a hero character, someone that we want to see succeed now. It changes the entire format of it.
Yeah. The Doctor, of course, is still a prominent character at that point, and you still want to see him have an improvement because of his association with Rantis, but it does feel like, yeah, at that point now, we sympathize with Rantis. We want him to succeed because he's this outsider who's not burdened with all the bullshit that all of us humans have. He's just a nice alien boy who wants to help.
I wonder how long Rantis would last if he came down and didn't go to an insane asylum and he had to, like, pay rent and taxes and, like, get a 9-to-5. How long would he keep up the be good to everybody?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. He says he can't feel, but he acts purely logical. So he sees someone hungry, he wants to give them food. He sees one upset, he wants to console them. But it's not like a feelings. It's more of a just obviously that's the response, like almost like a computer. Like, you know, something needs X, you give them X.
Which I like the concept of that. I like it, the idea that what we humans call empathy is just the natural order of the universe, but we give it like a special title because as humans, we're the weird ones that like go out of our way sometimes to not show empathy. We act maliciously towards other people at times.
That is one of the other main themes of this movie is the idea of us basically ignoring things that we know are going on, like bad things. There's people starving, there's people, you know, in trouble that need help, but we convince ourselves that and this is the way Rantis puts it in the movie, is that, but as long as you pay your taxes and you go to mass, you feel like you've done enough and that's it. You can just live in your bubble and never be concerned with what's actually happening to other people. Right. I think that's something that comes up a few times in the movie, and it's definitely this idea of like, you know, you're here, you're supposed to, your role as a doctor in this hospital is to be helping everyone. But the opening thing we hear from the Doctor in the opening narration is, I don't believe in this shit anymore. I don't think I can help anyone. I've not believed that in years. Like,
there's a guy who's recounting how like he had a suicide pact with his girlfriend. He ended up killing her, but then couldn't end up killing himself. And the Doctor, the only thing that's going through his mind is the like technical aspects of it. He's like, there's nothing I can do to help this guy. Should I like reach out and touch his hand? With that, is that going to be seen as empathy? Does he want that? Like, he's not thinking of it from a human level. He's purely like logically trying to just process and be like, I mean, I guess this might help. Sure, whatever.
And that's just one. Obviously, you get the irony of it after he's done thinking all these really cold, analytical things about him. He then says, "Don't worry, I'm going to help you," which feels super cynical and cold, which is a really nice introduction to the character and where he is. But that bit about if I reached out and touched his hand, would he see that as empathy? How would he react to it? That's actually a neat little bit of setup for later, because eventually it's actually going to be Rantos who takes the Doctor's hand, and the Doctor doesn't know how to react to it. He's almost confused about, like, wait, he's being kind and he's holding my hand. So it's a good little bit of setup. That's the thing. I think the movie's pretty good because it does these things. That it's good at introducing its characters, it's good at introducing its themes and its ideas. The other big thing that I would love to point out is that, you know, one of the earliest things that we see Rantos doing, in fact, the very first thing I think we see him doing, because we hear that he's there, but we've not seen him yet. When the Doctor finds him, he's in the chapel playing the organ, like perfectly, like he's just going out, he's going to town on it. And we find out quite quickly when the Doctor goes home that one of the few things he does for like enjoyment in his entire life right now, which seems to be devoid of happiness, he doesn't even answer the phone when his kids call. He lets the answering machine get it and listens to it later. And the kids even say on the call, "We hate talking to this machine. Please, machine, tell our dad to come and like do something fun with us this weekend." Like, it's
so heartbreaking.
But the thing that he does, the one thing he seems to do where he has some release is he plays saxophone. He plays music. So this idea, the very first time he sees Rantos, it's him doing the one thing that might actually form a link to him, because it's the one thing that he still sees some amount of joy in is music. So I think that's a really interesting link, and obviously music plays a big part as the movie goes on as well.
Yeah, I really like the idea of music in this, because obviously he plays the church organ, which exudes this idea of, faith and getting yourself closer to God or whatnot. Later on, we have this entire long segment of Ode to Joy being used as basically a thing that produces happiness in people.
I mean, let's talk about that, because this is the big cinematic piece of the movie, is the Ode to Joy stuff.
And that's real quick before I wanted to get to that, though, is that the doctor, what he plays is the saxophone. So a lot of what he's doing are these sort of sadder, more melancholy pieces. He's playing a lot more of like I said, it's very film noir. It's this idea of being alone in like a big city sort of thing. So this movie does a great job of establishing the mood of a character and their outlook on life using the music that they play as well. It's this idea that the doctor is much more morose than Rantis is, because Rantis is doing these big bombastic pieces because he enjoys spreading this happiness and wanting to improve people's lives like that.
Although, just to nitpick one word you said there, you said he enjoys doing this, but he doesn't feel. He logically sees, well, I don't really understand why this music is causing a reaction out of the other people around me, but it seems to bring them some form of comfort, so I'll keep playing it. That's the first thing he says. It's
a utilitarian point of view, where he's like, I'm getting nothing out of this, but I'm also not losing anything, but everyone else is gaining something. So it only makes sense for me to continue to do this.
And that said, though, I do think there's some progression. I think by the time we get to the Ode to Joy scene, I think he does get some joy out of making everyone else feel joy. I think that's a part of that scene. So
I think that somewhere around there is where we get into the traitor aspect of his story. But continue with the scene.
Yeah, so the setup for this is that Beatrice has come to see him again, and the doctor's tried to speak to her. I remind me to talk about her shoes in a bit. I want to talk about her shoes.
Yes.
But he is saying goodbye to her and says, hey, I'm taking Rantis out to a concert at the weekend. Would you like to come? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we get this scene where they go to this concert, and it's an orchestra playing, and they're playing Ode to Joy, and it is fine, but it's a little bit like low energy. Like, it feels like they're just doing okay,
Yeah. Everyone's just sitting and enjoying the music.
And Rantis is sitting in the middle of the doctor and Beatrice, and there's a moment here. In fact, there's a moment before this when he goes to talk to Beatrice when she's leaving the visiting the second time, where the doctor comes up and says, hey, do you have time for a cup of coffee? I'd like to talk to you about Rantis. And there's a little moment here where Rantis, after a couple of seconds just staring in that direction, for the first time in the movie, kind of lets out a smile. And I kind of got this vibe here that he was intentionally trying to bring this woman into the doctor's life, because he knew the doctor was sad and that he was feeling alone, and that was a big thing that was missing in his life right now. I almost got a bit, not like a setup, but I think one of the themes of this movie is absolutely that this character Rantis is like a light that brings happiness to everyone around him. Like, all the patients seem to follow him religiously at a certain point, where they're following him around and stuff like that. And even the doctor, he's trying to improve his life, and that leads us into this scene where he's sitting in between them, and he takes her hand and he takes the doctor's hand, and he holds both their hands. And it's notable that the doctor, after a couple of seconds, pulls it away, because he's like, oh, this is weird. I don't really know how to respond to this. But then Rantis takes up Beatrice in front of the crowd and starts just dancing like they're in a ballroom. And that's weird, because they're at a concert where everyone's just sitting around listening to the music. But after a few seconds of doing this, another couple get up and start dancing as well. And then another couple get up. And if you pay attention in this scene, every time it cuts back to the doctor looking around, like, what's he doing? He's causing people to dance. And as a viewer of the movie, all I can see is, no, he's bringing joy. Everyone's like getting happier and getting into what's happening, and that's not even the climax of the scene, because it goes way further than that, where after dancing a little bit, Rantis leaves her there and she sort of stays dancing on her own a little bit, right? He goes he wanders up to the stage and effectively just goes right up next to the conductor and just sort of puts in his hand and takes away his little, what would you call it?
I just say stick, the conductor stick.
The conductor wand, yes. Yeah. And he pushes him aside. And I love this moment here because he sort of does this, like, he gets his arms up and he's ready to go. And he sort of does this sort of the little movement for the first note. He wants to inspire the first little note of this. And he goes, and no one plays anything because everyone in the orchestra is just sitting there quietly being like, this random guy just walked up on stage and is trying to conduct us. Do we play?
Security.
And he tries to do it a second time and still no one plays. And then after the second time, like, a couple of them are like, okay, I'll like, why not? We'll play we'll play the piece. So the third time that you hear the actual musical note, and it's like there's a little smile on Rantis's face, and then he keeps sort of going, and he keeps going. People are dancing again in the crowd. As this is happening, it's like the inmates of the hospital are hearing it somehow, and they all start getting up and like dancing and marching down the hallways and.
Yes. So up to this point, all of the inmates like fully believe Rantis's story, and they also are essentially his disciples. If you take the Christ metaphor like to its logical endpoint, they are 100% in on what he's selling, and they are like able to connect with him on a deeper level than the normal people of the world. Yeah.
And it all keeps building up, and then the big climax is when it finally gets back to the, I don't know if this is the right term for it in this type of music, but the chorus of Ode to Joy, where it gets to that main theme and swells.
With it's like when the choir now singing as well.
It's when all the patients are at the gates of the hospital all yelling and stuff, and there's like police cars there, because like obviously the orderlies have called in the police, like, hey, I think we've got a riot happening here.
Yeah.
So they're all there, and as this is happening, the doctors finally come down and started to like dance with Beatrice and kisses her, and there's like a moment of true happiness as this is all happening, as Rantis is conducting the orchestra, and it really feels like for one moment he's just taken over and brought nothing but joy to everyone around him. Because I think whoever's running the concert does send in security, but the conductor who's like next to him is like, you know what? No, he's getting better results than I was. You stay back there for a second. I'm enjoying this. You stay there.
Hey, I'm on my 15. Just let him do it.
So yeah, it's a really big scene. It's a big it's definitely the most cinematic moment of the whole movie, where all this sort of comes together.
I think it's definitively like the turning point of the movie. I think that all of the plots at this point, whether it's the doctor and Beatrice or how we treat Rantis in the asylum, it's all of it just pivots at this point here.
Yeah, and some of the other things we've not really talked about yet is that Rantis wanted to like study the human brain, so he kind of like is allowed to work as an assistant to the pathologist or whoever it is, and we actually see him like messing around with the brain. And it's actually after this concert where the doctors get into trouble from the director of the hospital. It's like, hey, this is out of line. We're in the newspaper. Like, this delusion's clearly too strong. You have to start giving him these drugs. You have to start giving him, injections. And our main character doesn't want to do it, but he's kind of like in a hard place, and he just kind of has to agree to do it. And when he goes to tell Rantis this, Rantis is like, he's literally cutting up a brain, and he the doctors try to downplay it and say, oh, it's just some medication, it's not that big a deal, like, you'll be fine. But I think Rantis knows this is going to like take away who he is. So he starts getting really like philosophical in kind of a disgusting way, where he like takes a little chunk of the brain and rips it off and throws it down the drain and says, there goes Einstein, rips another bit off, oh, there goes, whoever, like that's it. Like,
well, it's the drugs that he's being given are antipsychotics. They are like drugs that directly impact the brain and like the structure and stuff like that. So I think him doing this is essentially basically him saying like, that what I'm doing is good. That like people enjoy, that people are having fun, and what you're about to do is going to take away all of that. And he's just showing like the pieces of the brain being ripped off is like, this is what's going to happen to me if you go through with this. But the doctor, like you said, he's stuck in a hard place, and he's not fully believing enough. He doesn't have enough faith in Rantis at this point that he's willing to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I'm not going to do this. He does end up going through with it.
Yeah, it goes back to that one of the very first conversations they had, where he's like, you just accept the bad things that are in the world and do nothing to stop them. And this is just another example of, this is clearly a bad thing that's about to happen to me, but you're going along with it because the systemic rules say that this is what should happen, and you're not questioning them. So
I really like that narrative. I really like this idea of, okay, we've got a character who can, like, again, just going back to the Jesus metaphor, it's a character who comes in and says, hey guys, the system sucks. Like,
Yeah.
there is a better way to do things, and it literally just all stems from having basic empathy for everyone. If as soon as you get that through your brain, great, cool, we're going to be solid. But, like, you have to get to that point. But then, obviously, the system itself kind of relies on empathy not being given to everyone. There's a certain in-group and out-group, and he's in the out-group, and so it just slowly starts taking away from him. And I really like that as a narrative, because while dour, it is this idea that no matter what people want, no matter how bright the light is shining on people, they're going to find a way to just tear it down and dim it, just because there is so much just anger and like upset people in the world who just cannot enjoy that sort of thing.
Yeah. And when he starts getting these injections, he becomes more, stoic. He stops speaking very much. The one meaningful thing he does before he really gets bad is that he wants to improve the food in the cafeteria for everyone else because it's not very good. So to try and make his point, he asks to see the director of the hospital, and all he wants is the director of the hospital to sample the food himself. That's all he wants. But the director just refuses to see him. So he just sits outside the door waiting, and then when that doesn't work, he goes to like a newspaper's office, and they're interested to a point in the story, but like he just won't leave until the director comes and samples the food. So the police have to come and get him and take him back to the hospital, and it just fails. Like he tries to do this simple thing to help just a few people that he's surrounded by, and it doesn't work because everyone around him just says, "No, we're not going to entertain this. Go back to your hole and stay there." Is the response from everyone. So, which,
I mean, it doesn't match up 1-to-1, but there is obviously some parallels there between him trying to get the guy to sample the food and then like the idea of the Last Supper.
Yeah.
Like the last thing that he did is this meal sort of thing with his disciples.
I mean, again, my Bible knowledge is not super strong, and whatever I did know when I was taught in school is eroded over the years. But certainly this idea that he is like, not everyone, from what I recall, in the world was supposed to have taken kindly to Jesus's teachings. You know, the establishment didn't like that he was here trying to improve things for everyone. And I think that's definitely part of this movie. I mean,
one of the last lines we get out of Rantis is he's, been injected multiple times now. He's obviously not feeling well. And the last thing he says is, "Doctor, doctor, why have you forsaken me?" Which... in the Bible story, the last words of Jesus, almost, there were like a few afterwards, was, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" So obviously the parallels are 100% intentional there.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, there's not a single parallel to the Bible in this that is not intentional, I don't think. It's all there. Just to rewind a little bit, I want to talk about the scenes where he uses telekinesis. Well, one's just him moving a radio so he can sneak past the guards. It's not really that big a deal. But there's a scene where he's at a diner. And again, this emphasizes this idea that he sees people in need and then chooses to help them because they're in need. And he's sitting at a diner, and across the other side, this is one of those sort of U-shaped counters where there's like another side to it. And he sees across on the other side of the counter, there's a woman with 3 children, and she's got one like ham sandwich that she's splitting up and she's feeding to her kids in little bites. The idea that, this is all they can afford, so she's just spreading the food as far as it can stretch. He sees this and uses his telekinesis to move, like, so that the cook or whoever's just put a plate with steak on it on the edge of the counter for like a waiter to come and get it. And he telekinetically moves the plate down to where the family are. And he does the same on the other side with a bowl of pasta or something like that. And basically brings them these food. And the woman's hesitant to take it from them at first because she's like, this isn't our food. We didn't pay for this. But she ultimately does start feeding her kids with all this food. And part of me was thinking in the moment, I was like, yeah, but like, it's just going to look like she stole this food. Like, when the cook and the waiter notice the plate's gone and they see her with this plate of steak sitting in front of her, they're not going to go, "Oh, something intervened and gave her it." They're just going to think she stole it. Now, to be fair, the scene addresses this because Rantis notices they're starting to question where the plate went and causes a distraction by telekinetically moving a bunch of glasses off of a shelf. So it just starts smashing. And they're distracted by that. The women and her kids leave. But yeah, we see him using powers to help someone.
Yeah, which again, going to the Christ metaphor, this is, I think, supposed to be representative of the story where Jesus multiplied out like fish and bread to feed
Yes, I remember
5,000 people sort of thing. It's this idea that, he's able to get people these food and stuff like that. And I like that it comments a little bit on how it would work in the modern day, because obviously back then the idea of fish and bread, like, yes, there are people who sell them, but for the most part, the idea of like anyone can go out and just catch a fish and then they'll just have it, Whereas nowadays, like if you want food, you have to buy it from somebody. There are very few precious things that you can actually just grow and have yourself. Like no matter what, you got to go through something. So it's this idea that he wasn't able to multiply the food, but he was able to like move it around from the people who had enough to the people who didn't have enough. And in a perfect world, obviously, that sounds like a great idea. But under the system that currently exists, yeah, it looks like she's just stealing it. And he has to come up with a cover for her as well in order to get her out of there.
Yeah. And what's the solution here? The guy that bought a steak has to buy another steak, or the restaurants made two steaks now because they have to replace the steak that got stolen?
Yeah, obviously the idea here is like, oh, if there's a person who's hungry, you feed them and you just eat the loss. Like if your business is thriving enough, you just do that. But obviously he wasn't able to do that with his powers. All he's got is telekinesis. So
yeah. It is interesting. I think, see if we didn't get those scenes and it was just the blue liquid coming out of Beatrice's mouth at the end, I would have probably accepted it a lot better, just in the sense that, okay, you're giving us one little thing that looks like, oh, that is kind of otherworldly. I mean, maybe you could explain it as just, she's got some kind of condition where like she has a bit of blue in her saliva or something.
Right.
But like you could sort of, oh, he kind of said something earlier that maybe implies that is a hint that she is something different, and then maybe you could believe. But I think because you're seeing him use telekinesis, it does kind of feel like, okay, we know this is just to some extent true. Right. And we just accept that, and because of that, you're kind of waiting for the Doctor to see proof, because we've seen proof, so we feel like he should have it too. I think if you wanted to play the ambiguity and like, was there any truth to this, I think we should have been in the dark as much as the Doctor is.
And I mean, I do find it very interesting that both of these scenes where he uses his telekinesis are very separate. They're very cuttable from the story. It's not like it's something where it develops... It develops him as a character, especially for the feeding scene, of like empathy and stuff like that, of showing that he's going out and he's not just all talk. He's actually doing things to help other people. But all in all, you could cut these scenes entirely, and I don't think that you would lose anything to the story. And possibly you would gain something, because again, it would shift your perspective from an audience member of knowing he's real to having to have that faith that he is.
Do you think there's an implication that this, like, maybe the idea is that we can read this as, oh, he's not really going out and doing these things. He never actually leaves the building. He's just imagining this.
I would say yes, if it weren't for the fact that Beatrice has the long-running thing of saying, like, oh, he's actually out helping, like, kids in slums and stuff like that. And I don't have any reason why she would lie about that, especially considering she's a traitor there. But yeah, for the other stuff, that would also be an interesting idea as to, you know, a person in an insane asylum, how, like, we get the idea that he obviously has some paranoid delusions, but maybe he is, like, fully crazy, where he's imagining that he's doing things that he's not actually doing as well. I think that would also be an interesting concept to it, but it's just, it doesn't come across in this one.
It would also tie into one of the things he says at one point, which is an interesting theme, is that in this world, to be truly, like, empathetic and selfless, that looks insane to almost everyone else.
Yeah.
You could play with that a little bit, I suppose, if you went down that path. So, yeah, to jump back towards the end of the movie then, so after the injections have started and Rantis is getting worse and worse, he's just getting more and more catatonic, he's not really paying attention. One of the key things that's changed is that he's not facing the right direction anymore, he's actually pivoted a little bit. And it's this idea that maybe, like, you know, they've broken his antenna by messing with his brain, because his brain was what was sending signals or whatever. So Beatrice phones the Doctor, and the Doctor, like, almost begs her. Like, it's almost like he's been longing to see her again.
Yeah, you definitely get earlier setup. Obviously, they kissed during the Ode to Joy thing, but even before that, you get this idea that he is interested in her romantically from the beginning. And obviously, we've got a whole backstory with his, like you said, his ex-wife, or possibly, well, I'm assuming ex-wife because the kids aren't with him, but
Yeah, I think it's just implied they're divorced. Yeah,
right. But obviously he's ready to get out there again, and he wants to get
even
with her.
he has this sort of the cliche scene almost where he's watching the home movies of him with the kids and the wife, and like being depressed and drinking and playing his saxophone and whatnot. And even like we see him with his kids a couple times. Once where he takes them to the zoo, and they didn't want to go to the zoo; they wanted to go to the circus, but he forgot to bother buying tickets. So it's like, well, we'll go to the zoo this weekend. It's like again. But then the next time when he does take them to the circus, notably he brings Rantis with them, and he's almost like jealous that the kids both seem to like take to Rantis so quickly, where they're cuddling his arms as opposed to him. It's an interesting little moment where
like it's immediately following that scene is one of like it's basically where Rantis lays it all out, because the doctor calls him out. He's just like, Rantis, what's the end game here? What are you aiming for? And Rantis just lays out his entire manifesto. He's just like, empathy should not be this thing that is the exception. It should be the norm, and blah blah blah. And like you said, the paying your taxes and going to mass line. So at that point, it's he's not only jealous of Rantis in the fact of like him doing better with his own kids, but also in the fact of no, he's actually like,
he's right.
Yeah, he's torn you down to your core of a human being, because he also tears down the doctor of like, you're miserable. You know you're miserable, but you refuse to do anything about it. Why do you want to live like that?
Yeah, I think
I don't get it.
At one point he says the line, like, humans are very good at just slowly killing themselves and not doing anything to stop it. So this all bubbles up to when Beatrice comes to see him at his apartment, and the doctor, like, she basically begs, hey, why have you abandoned Rantis? Because we get the implication here that he's not even seeing Rantis as much anymore, and it's almost like he feels too guilty to actually be there. Now that the injections are starting to really show effect, and Rantis is like just staring out the window, and he's because there's a quick shot of him getting injected in his backside, and it just feels kind of sad. It feels very like just dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And it's like, why have you abandoned Rantis? And he's trying to say that he hasn't, but when she says she has to go, he says, no, please don't. And he makes a move. He goes in to kiss her, and he opens her shirt up and gets intimate, and she kind of responds to it. And they end up having sex on the floor, and we see the emotional reaction of the blue liquid coming out of her mouth, which is that kind of, it is a really good moment the way it's filmed, I have to say.
Yeah.
But when it's over, and she's lying there, and he's just kind of got his head on her stomach, this is where she opens up and confesses that she is from the same place that Rantis is, and explains that she's a traitor technically, and that she decided she wanted to be one with the humans and experience all the feelings and all that. And he is like, come on, you're kidding me. And then he gets angry. He grabs her and he throws her out for acting like a lunatic. That's what he says. You're a lunatic just like him. Get out of my house. Throws her out. But notably, after he does so, he realizes she's left her bag there, and he sees a photograph that's been ripped. So we don't know who's on the other side of the photograph that's been ripped off. But on the side that's still there, it's her and it's Rantis, and they both look about 10 years younger, something like that. It's totally an older photograph, and it's suggesting that they have known each other for a long time. So he does want to question about that. He tries to question Rantis about it, I think, afterwards at his office. But
he's basically like, are you wife, sister? Please say sister, because if it's wife, I got some bad news, Rantis. Yeah,
because I think even as Beatrice was like confessing who she is, she's like, oh, I feel like I've betrayed like Rantis, and he's like, oh wait, because you and him have been intimate, and she's like, no, not like that. Betrayed because I'm from where he is, and I've decided to be with the humans. Almost like between her and Rantis, there's this kind of like a difference in ideology, because she's chosen to be with the humans as opposed to him trying to help and change the humans. We should probably also mention that Rantis at one point says that he's on a rescue mission, and that he's going to try and take some of the people who have been the most hurt by this world back with him, which is an interesting idea as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like it from the perspective of it. At no point in this movie, because they keep on saying that the traitors are the ones who like get more involved, who get out there and do stuff, whereas the people who are staying on mission are the ones that are keeping to their insane asylums, and they're learning about people there. Because honestly, the mission is not to fix the planet. The mission is to understand emotion. It's to understand how humans process emotion, and how they do that.
Rewind to one of the first things he ever says is he refers to it as a weapon. He says, we understand how to like combat all of your other weapons, meaning, you know, literal missiles and artillery and nukes and whatever. But the one weapon we don't really know how to fight is your emotion. So again, it's a really interesting concept.
Well, yeah, because especially with the idea of the traitor stuff is like, if you view it from the idea of an army, then they are losing soldiers in this. I don't want to say fight or anything like that, but like they're losing soldiers to this thing of emotions. Just being around them is enough for that to happen. So clearly they would like a better understanding of it, strictly for the purposes of, we can get in and get these people who are being wronged by you, because they are essentially, if you view human lack of empathy as a weapon, they're essentially being tortured each and every day by this lack of empathy.
Yeah. And, you know, what is art if nothing else but to express emotion and try to understand why we feel the things we do? So the fact that our main character, our alien character here, his whole purpose is to try and understand why the humans are as effed up as they are. It does work in a lot of levels, which is why I think the movie's pretty good. I just don't think it hits transcendent levels because I have some nitpicks with some of its choices.
There was one line in this that I felt like was really, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but really bringing it to the forefront as to what they were doing. But I didn't understand it because of the cultural divide, or possibly because of the time as well. As he's speaking to the director's chewing him out, saying like, you let him get up there and conduct an orchestra. And he's just like, yeah, well, he wasn't hurting anybody. He was just doing that. And the director calls out saying, well, it's a good thing you didn't bring him to a military parade, or else he would have the military sicked on all the people hanging around there. And the doctor says something along the lines of, yeah, well, they already did that.
Actually, the specific line he says, it's a good job you didn't take him to like a military parade, because then you'd have a madman ordering military strikes. And then he says, no, they already did. Basically, he's implying that whoever's in charge of the military at the time was a madman. So,
which I feel like just brings the entire point forward of saying like who's to say that he's any more insane than anybody else? And he's just trying to show empathy where we have already got a crazy person who's doing all of this horrible, evil stuff. Again, you said that this was in, I believe, Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the politics of Buenos Aires.
I don't think it matters who he's specifically referring to. That line works for almost any country.
Yeah.
Right? It really does.
I just wonder how recently in the public consciousness it was.
Sure.
Like, is this something that happened just like 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Is it something that like is a lot older in this history? It feels like the way he said it, it feels like the guy's still in office.
So, yeah, by the end of the movie, sadly, that Rantis dies. When he goes more catatonic, a doctor on site, not our main character, but a doctor on site, orders shock treatment because that's the standard thing to do in that situation, according to the movie. And he has a bad reaction to the anesthesia and has a heart attack. And he has died. And we see the reaction of this is that all the patients in the hospital don't accept that he's dead, and they all stand in a big circle in the courtyard as if they're worshipping him. Again, the biblical kind of references there kind of speak for themselves.
Yep.
And the ending, you know, for the doctor is that he's still alone, he's still with his saxophone, and he's hoping that he'll see Beatrice again, but maybe he never will. And one of the things that's brought up earlier was in the car ride scene as well, when he talks about like how he views human beings. That actually, before he gets to all that stuff, where he kind of like gets to the core of like what his problems with humanity are, he talks about how sometimes like scents come in the window, and you know, why is that? And the doctor talks about how it can trigger memories. And Rantis basically says that the people who have betrayed their cause and become human, it's because they actually have smelled and like it's triggered feelings and memories in them, and that's what's made them go. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because there's a couple of times in this movie where the doctor's at home and you'll just see like the curtains blowing in the background from the window, and it's really meant to be this idea that I don't want to say that the love and empathy and all that is like a mystical force, but it's definitely kind of this idea that it can be blown at any point. And every time he hears a breeze at the end, he turns around and looks at it as if he's hoping that that's the real thing coming back for him, that he's not alone anymore. There's kind of like a real sad quality to it.
I feel like it's, at the end, it's definitely supposed to represent the idea of empathy as a whole, but I also feel like it's kind of throughout supposed to represent Rantis as well, just like as a concept. Because there's a point when he's first talking to Beatrice where somehow the window to his office is open. He doesn't know how, and the breeze starts rolling in, and he has to like get up and close it. He gets up and he's just like, sorry, hold on, let me get it. Because I think that he feels talking to Beatrice in this way is also kind of a level of betrayal to Rantis, of like trying to figure out more about him behind his back sort of thing.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think in that moment I also read that scene as like the window's just symbolic of like the Doctor starting to be more open, but when he notices that he's kind of let himself be more open, he chooses to shut it.
Yeah, that's true. But speaking of Beatrice, you wanted to talk about her shoes.
Oh yeah. So we see this the first time she's leaving the hospital, and then it happens again the second time. But the second time, she specifically asked to like be alone for a moment because she's going to coffee with the Doctor, and she just goes around the corner and like swaps her shoes, and she's got a bag with another pair of shoes in it. But notably, they're identical shoes. It's the same flat blue shoes that she was wearing before. I have no idea what this represented, David. So if you've got any ideas, I would love to hear them.
The only thing that I can think, and this is a stretch because it doesn't really apply here, but the only thing I can think is going back to the Jesus metaphor. There is the part where Jesus washed the feet of a prostitute, and that was like a whole big thing of him lowering himself to wash the feet of someone who was like lower class or whatnot. I mean, it's a foot thing, but that is literally all I got. Yeah, it's a complete mystery there. The only thing that I could also think is that from a narrative perspective, I think it's supposed to show that she also has her own little like quirks and weird oddities and stuff. Maybe shoes are the thing to some extent that like got her to be a traitor in the first place. Maybe she got some level of joy out of that, but it doesn't come up at any other later point, so I'm not sure.
So I googled just to see if there was like a simple explanation, and this is just an IMDb review, so I don't know if this is accurate, but the commenter says that the director admitted later that there's no concrete reason for the changing of the shoes, which is like, okay, but you still thought of her to do that, so what was the choice? Right. Why did you make that choice, though? I want to know.
I don't know. Maybe it could just be one of those, it's the earliest inception of J.J. Abrams' mystery box, where he just sets it up and then he just never bothers to come back to it.
Yeah, I was assuming there was something symbolic there that I just wasn't quite getting, because she goes out of her way to do it twice, and notably keeps it a secret when she does it the second time. She doesn't want anyone to see her do it.
Yeah, it's also every time that she's leaving the asylum. It's not like just randomly in the middle. It's always when she's leaving. So,
yes,
I don't know.
I don't know either. But
I'm glad you brought it up because I would have either. It's such like, I'd be okay with it if it were just, in the background, like, she sits down, has a conversation and changes her shoes, because then it just feels like, oh yeah, she's got like visiting shoes when she's like in there and like wants to look nice, and then she's got just general walking shoes. But the fact that they take the time to specifically show her changing them out, it feels like it has so much more purpose. But I don't know what it is either.
Yeah. All right. I mean, is there any other like beats you want to hit on before we get to ratings? Because I feel like we've covered most of the big things I want to talk about.
So the one thing is the box he keeps under his bed.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That's a big thing. So we're shown it much earlier on in the movie. It's probably not discovered until about like a third to a halfway through. And that is, he's got a box of newspaper clippings that are basically all just examples of humanity sucking. It's just like children are hungry or people are homeless. And it's just all these examples of this stuff. But the big thing that comes out of the box is that there is a hand-drawn like crown drawing of a home with like some grass and stuff like that. And this also kind of goes back to the shoe thing for me of, I don't think there was ever a concrete definitive like what is this given in the movie, they play with a few concepts of like, did this come from like a child? Is this something that you drew and you held on to for all these years? What is this drawing? But I don't think he ever outright says it in any concrete fashion.
No, it's kind of left there. I think that they are planting seeds for like maybe if you wanted to read the movie that he isn't what he says he is and it is in his head, that maybe like they are brother and sister and like their parents were on the other side of that photograph, or maybe they were young parents themselves and on the other side of the photograph was a child that they'd lost, and maybe that's what, you know, did this to him and perhaps her as well. Maybe that's why she believes these things. I mean, the movie, after all, does start, like you said, with that patient who's new, who's talking about the suicide pact that he had with his girlfriend. It does open with this idea that a couple can go through something together where they're both in this really bad mental state. And in this case, the guy just survived the suicide pact. But that does at least start the movie off in this idea that like trauma can be shared between two people and it can maybe break them in similar or different ways. I mean, after all, she does keep saying, oh, there's a boy that he's helping teach play, was it piano or whatever the music was? But like, she kept saying...
it was a sport.
No, it was
maybe
music.
It was an instrument. It was an instrument?
I think
I can't remember what it was.
Because she keeps saying, oh, there's this boy in the slums that he keeps helping. Maybe in some like way, this is like her referring back to their own child together or something. He was a good father, and there's I don't know. Maybe I'm reading into that too much there.
No, I mean, again, I think all of these would be really, really interesting points for the movie if we didn't get concrete evidence that he has telekinesis. Like, that's the thing that pulls me away from it, is that all of this stuff seems to imply like, oh no, he was just a human. He was just a guy who went through a hard time and he crafted this inner narrative to deal with whatever horror he went through. But because we outright see, at least in the language of the film, that he definitely has these powers, those other clues just feel superfluous, because by that point in the movie, we're already on the side of, no, he's special. Anything that you're going to show here can be explained away. There's nothing that I need to have any sort of doubt over.
Yeah, I think the child's drawing is the one that sticks out, though. The rest of it being just examples of humanity being bad, like, makes sense. I'm
talking about that, and then the picture at the end are the two big ones he was a human before or had some previous thing.
Yeah, obviously her explanation for that is that they came here together, right, from whatever planet they came from. But if you're reading it more as, no, they were siblings, something bad happened, they were young parents together because they were barely out at being teenagers by the looks of it, then, you know, whatever, you could take things down that path. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think the movie needs definitive answers, and if anything, I want it to be more ambiguous, because I just didn't want to see the telekinesis powers being used. So, because the part of the movie ultimately is about how this doctor character, like, sees these moments, right? When the Ode to Joy stuff's happening, he finally lets go and kisses the woman that he's attracted to. He experiences joy again, literally, and his life is maybe better for it. But then he just can't quite help him out when he needs it. When the director says you have to inject him and take away who he is, it's obviously in a more sort of like straight level. It's also kind of poking at how we treat the mentally ill as well. I think maybe, you know, like, we've not really been talking about that. We've been talking about the bigger themes and ideas it's been doing, but there's definitely some of that in there as well.
I mean, the whole fact that the asylum, yes, they were the people who were closest to Rantis, but it also feels like during that Ode to Joy scene, the reason that they are the ones that are so in tune, the ones who were, despite being miles away, they were so able to feel that level of joy there, is because they are free in a way from the societal implications of lack of empathy or anything like that. Yes, they're subjected to some of the worst, but internally they are the most free, that they don't have to deal with the societal pressures of, no, you know, show up to mass, pay your taxes, and then that's all you got to do. Yeah,
and the doctor's ending is being alone again and having like achieved none of the happiness that he maybe could have achieved had he like stood up for. Because I think by the time he's been told to inject Rantis, I don't think he does not believe that's the right course of action. And he argues a little bit, but he does give in. He ultimately just accepts that this is what the system is and does it. And I think his ending of being alone, hoping that the woman that he threw out, because that's the thing, he also has this memory now of throwing out this woman that he clearly cared about. He just wrote her off immediately as soon as she said that she was something different. And now he's sitting here alone, longing for the idea that she might come back someday.
I will say one of the final things, though, is that A, we see the breeze rolling in through the window one more time at the very end. And then B, he goes to play his saxophone, which again has always been very sad, very morose music, but he stops. He doesn't actually play it. He just lets it sit, which I think still shows there is a level of character progression. It's not a full tragedy of he ends up in a worse place than he was before, but it is still bittersweet in a lot of ways. It's still this problem.
Bittersweet is absolutely what I was going for. Obviously, I think he at least can reflect upon everything he's went through by the end of this story. But it's not like this big Hollywood happy ending where like everything in his life is solved. It is actually, despite everything else in this movie, like you said, his story is a lot more grounded in that he's just nudged forward a little bit, and him not just playing that saxophone again to make himself feel better is like the one small thing that maybe will come out of this. Maybe at the very least he'll have a better relationship with his kids. Yeah,
I mean, his kids, even if I feel like if we got one or two more scenes at the end here where we just see him going back to his job, a new patient is admitted, and he just actually feels empathy.
Yeah, actually cares.
His internal monologue isn't saying anything. He just outstretches a hand and like puts it on the guy's hand. That would be enough.
There's an argument. So before I was arguing that photograph of Beatrice and Rantis were brother and were a couple, right? And they had a young kid, and that explains the child's drawing. I'm going to look at it from the other side now. I think there's an argument here thematically that because our main character is a single dad of two kids that are a boy and a girl, that it thematically makes sense that they were brother and sister, and that their father was a big part of like why they are the way they are.
Yeah. I mean, he specifically says like, oh, I've come up with theories or whatnot, like maybe their father was a drunk and he just never treated them right. Meanwhile, throughout this movie, you see him pouring constant drinks as he listens to his child's messages over the answering machine. So there's obviously some self-reflection there.
Yeah. And at one point, Beatrice says that when she met Rantis said that he was an alcoholic and he was recovering, even though that never came up once, in anything with the doctor. It never came up. He's surprised to hear that. And later on, when he asked Rantis about it, Rantis just says, oh, it was easier to say that than the truth of being an alien and whatnot. But obviously, we find out later that that's a lot of nonsense, because if she's also an alien, why would he have to lie about anything? So it feels like if she made that lie up herself just to try and have a story, then where did she pull that from? Maybe it is because their father was an alcoholic and it led to a bad childhood that somehow resulted in this shared trauma they now have. So there's a lot of thematic things in there to support multiple interpretations of what their backstory is that isn't they are aliens with this, yeah. So, I mean, if nothing else, this has been interesting to talk about. There's been a lot of meat to chew on and talk about what the meaning of the story is, even outside of the bigger philosophical, biblical like things that we've talked about. Right. But even just in terms of a character level, there's some interesting stuff to discuss. So I think it is a really solid movie and it's well made. I think the narration's a bit heavy at times. Like I'll maybe give it that critique.
Yeah, it does a lot to develop the doctor character whenever he's alone, but I think that there's a lot better ways to show that rather than having to just straight up tell like it. At one point he says, after it's revealed that Rantis is saying how there's multiple different aliens all across the world talking to different psychiatrists or whatever, he goes through a whole like inner monologue saying like, yes, if it's almost laughable that there would be that many Christs, and I know that my part to play in this may as well be Pontius Pilate, and he goes through this whole long thing. But I feel like all of it is just kind of adding to things that we already would have gotten by the time we got to later in the story. Yeah, it's not something that needed to be spelled out via voiceover.
Yeah, so I think that's fair. So with all that said, David, what are you going to rate Man Facing Southeast?
God. Like I said, it's a good movie. I think it's produced well. I think there's some solid inner workings there. My biggest critique with it is that I feel like from a plot perspective, it's much more just focused on the philosophical, hey, humanity, get your act together. And it doesn't really do a lot to explore these character dynamics in any heavy way. Obviously we get the doctor character, but like I wanted to see a bit more in terms of how Rantis interacts with the world. I wanted to see a bit more of like how Beatrice fits into all this. In the end, it just felt like there was a big chunk of it either missing or purposely omitted because they wanted to do more of this philosophical stuff. But again, I'm not upset with the philosophical stuff on its own. I think there's some great points to draw there, and I think that it's got a lot to say. It's just in terms of structure of a movie, it's just got a couple flaws. The biggest of which is that we do get definitive proof that he has telekinesis, which is a problem for just viewing it through the philosophical lens. So all in all, I think I would probably end up giving this one, I'll give it a 7.5. It's just shy of that great mark, but I can see why this movie is one of those ones that gets talked about, especially from the viewpoint of it having a lot to say rather than it's actually something that's recognized for, like, you know, great world building or a great plot or great characters or anything like that. It's just something that has a message that it wants to share, and it does it in a very interesting way.
Yeah, I smelled there when you said your rating, because 7.5 is exactly what I was thinking. I just don't think it quite hits great for me. It could, I mean, it could develop over time if I see it again in the future. It's the sort of thing I could see growing on me the more I think about what's in there.
I fully want to see a 45-minute long documentary on YouTube just breaking down the shoe thing. Someone do that. I want to know.
So 7.5, which is, I think, good, even very good, but just not quite into great territory for me as a complete package as a movie. But definitely worth seeing. I think it's very interesting. Obviously, it's science fiction. It's more theoretical science fiction. It's more, you know, talking about the ideas rather than doing them. But that's equally as science fiction as anything else. Yeah. Yeah, very good. So that is that. David's, of course, got his homework movie that he'll talk about in a minute. But just before he does that, I'll just remind you that if you want to support the content and help keep all the shows coming, including the Atomic Cinema Experiment and Collector's Cut, which is where we work through other franchises that aren't sci-fi, or Streams After Midnight that I do with Tim, the horror movie podcast, you can support all of that stuff over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And every month you'll get bonus shows, including 2 with me and David. One is the Criterion Cut, which is where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and the other one is Extra Reels, where we review some of the worst, hopefully so bad they're good, movies of all time, but doesn't always pan out that way. But yes, wouldn't be able to do all this without the support either on Patreon, or if you prefer YouTube memberships and things like that, those are also an option. But if you want to help support everything, it's greatly appreciated at any amount, any fashion, any way. So yes, David, actually, just before you do that as well, next week on the show, if you're thinking, oh, this was a bit of a niche pick for an episode this week, don't worry, next week is RoboCop, okay?
Is that like a indie film? Is that, I haven't, what's a RoboCop?
Yes, Rob O'Cop.
Rob O'Cop.
Yes, it's an Irish man. RoboCop.
I'm down.
All right, what was your homework movie this week?
Well, Man Facing Southeast is actually really difficult to find through any sort of means to watch. So I was doing a bit of Googling, trying to figure out where I could find it. And I came across a thread that said, hey, if you like Man Facing Southeast, you should definitely pair it up with Blade Runner. So I did Blade Runner.
Okay.
I don't know why the thread said that, but there is a lot of overlap in terms of, you know, it's a film noir sort of vibe to it. It's got these deeper ideas to, like, you know, like existence as a whole and like morality and stuff like that. Just my experience with Blade Runner, never seen it.
Oh, okay.
I had never actually gotten around to that. I obviously I have access to like the score sheets and all the ratings we have for previous stuff. And as I was looking through 80s movies, I noticed that you guys gave Blade Runner like really not great scores, which was confusing to me because I always hear Blade Runner talked about in such positive messaging. And I was like, oh, well, you know, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to watch the final cut. And like,
yeah, that's the right choice,
apparently that's the one I should do. So I went into it giving it every opportunity to impress me because I really wanted to be impressed by it. That being said, I kind of get why you guys gave it not great scores.
Hey, look, it looks amazing. It sounds amazing.
Yep.
But then there's the story and the pacing.
I think that Blade Runner is probably a masterclass on the idea of world building without actually having to do like any sort of real backstory, because the world feels so lived in, it feels so alive in its own way. I think it does a great job of setting things up here. Obviously, that's exactly what 2019 looked like in Los Angeles, so that's a plus. But no, it's a great world that was set up there. But yeah, no, I mean, even the characters who may or may not be replicants, all of them just felt like robots. I didn't feel like I was connecting with any of them by the time the movie ended.
Yeah, I mean,
and by the time the movie ended, I was like, oh, that was it.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I mean, I've said my piece on Blade Runner before, so I won't really go into it too much again. I'll just reiterate one point I made in the review, which is the speech that's made at the end by Rutger Hauer's character is a phenomenal little speech, and I want to see the rest of the movie that actually belongs in, because Blade Runner is not the rest of that movie.
Yeah, no, it implies, like, again, this much larger world that feels so cool, but this movie was, I think, just a bit too limited in its own scope. It was a bit too
I'm sorry,
small
David.
of what
Did
they
you not
actually did.
enjoy Harrison Ford saying enhance 10 times at a CRT screen while it zoomed in?
You know what? When he started doing it, I was like, all right, he has a physical photo that he scanned in, so theoretically he could get a bit more enhancement out of it. But then as he got to like the 6th level of enhancement, I was like, bro, you're looking at atoms. There's no more detail to be seen here. Stop enhancing.
Reminds me of one of my favorite jokes from Community, which is it cuts to Pierce and the other old guy, I think Leonard's his name, and they're looking at a computer screen, and the implication is that they've gotten a photo from their drone that they're trying to look at, and Pierce keeps going, enhance, that's it, we've got it. And then it cuts to the screen, and what they're actually done is they've just been making the text in the manual bigger so they can figure out how to use the drone.
Wow. That is good.
Because they're old people and their eyesight sucks.
Yep.
Anyway.
But yeah, no, I like I said, I really wanted to like Blade Runner. I was going in giving it every opportunity, but honest to God, it seemed like they wanted to do too much and not enough at the same time. The focus was just a bit too all over the place, and by the end of it, I felt like I just didn't get anything out of the movie. So overall, I am going to give it a 5.5, because I think that the world building's good enough to boost it over that 5 mark. But yeah, no, I can't come at that giving it any higher than that.
Is that even lower than I gave it? I feel like I gave it a 6.
Yeah, you gave it a 6.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I've tried. Like Blade Runner is like the movie out of all movies that have ever been made that I just don't like that much, but I really want to like it, so I keep giving it more chances.
Same. I mean, I haven't watched 2049 yet, so I will get to that one eventually, but that is one that I'm going to hold out hope. I'm going to hope that it is the thing that they actually wanted to do here.
Oh, well. All right, well, that will bring an end to this episode of the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Hopefully you had a good time, and we will see you next week for another 80s movie, but this one much bigger, and that is RoboCop. So join us for that, and we will see you then. But otherwise, that is the show. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction movies and computer ad salsa.